Good?
Yes. So anyways, guys, I was just talking about convergence onto similarly patterned colors and forms evolutionarily in this group, and Brad's gonna tell us some more. Sorry about the video cutout, but we're back, part 2.
Yeah, I mean, we see that kind of stuff all over the place, right? In this case, it's convergent evolution to this aposematic coloring of orange juxtaposed to black, right? That makes the colors very bright and vibrant. In monarch butterflies, that is the case because they're trying to be visible, right? They want those high contrast colors so things can see them and recognize them because of their toxicity. In this group, my guess is that these colors are actually more for mating. So you can see at the bottom of the wings, they don't have that warning coloring. And so when they were trying to not maybe display to other conspecifics, they probably have their wings closed and try to be hiding with their camouflage. Monarch butterflies don't have that on the back, right? They're still bright and orange on both sides.
Beautiful.
The same thing goes for colors, the things that bees and wasps have, right? It's again, orange or yellow against black. It's high contrasting warning colors because they have some sort of defense, be it a toxicity or a sting. And so that's how they protect themselves. It's actually by being more visible. Most of the time, you won't see that. And again, you have, even the other side of these, they don't necessarily. The orange might be beneficial to the communication between the same, but they want to close their wings oftentimes, probably for protection. And you'll see various different types of camouflaging and things. I don't know if we have any native species that really show that off very well, at least now that I have out here. But part of that might be due to the lack of predators that historically has been experienced here in Hawaii. Right now we're kind of in a completely different era due to the introduction of different plants, animals, and various things. And so, unfortunately, in terms of the natural history of Hawaii, we're in this period where the native species are really being damaged by human introductions. This drawer is actually all introduced species, and this one is all native species. And unfortunately, you see these a lot more often. And the things like ants, wasps, right? These kinds of predators are actually some of the ones that are kind of implicated in the potential predators and the reason why things like the Kamehameha butterfly, their populations have been reduced recently, or they've been shifting to different areas where they weren't usually found, because it's easy for things like ants to scour the bushes and decimate the populations, whereas this coloring might be more effective against, say, a bird who can't see it. The ants will scour for the larvae and things like that, and might have an easier time finding them. These are predators the butterflies might not have historically had to deal with.
Nice.
Some other interesting kind of, speaking of like camouflage and another interesting group, and I will, actually, yeah, you can come over here, I guess. This is another group. When we're talking about extreme diversity, this is kind of my advisor's like pet group, so always like to mention it, and they are extremely interesting, regardless of my advisor's like for them. So this is a group called the Hyposmacoma. It's a group of microlepidopterans, so small moths. We've blown them up here, and on this poster you can see some of the adult diversity, as well as a variety of these cases. The larvae make cases and live inside of them. And you can see these cases come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. They form monophyletic groups based on case type, which tells us that what likely happened in terms of the evolutionary history of this group, which is really interesting because it's one of the few insect groups, one of the few species in general, I think, in the Hawaiian Islands whose origins we can trace back before Kauai, right? So Kauai rose, I believe, is 5 million years ago. Mm-hmm. And so you can actually trace the origin of this group back more than 15 million years to various lineages from the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. So in terms of evolutionary history, what likely happened is one ancestor colonized one of those Northwest Hawaiian Islands, and then they radiated on that island to form various different case types. And then those case types all individually bounced islands, as opposed to, say, one individual bouncing and re-radiating.
Cool.
it's
yeah, we've been talking about progression and things that follow that or don't, and we've just had a great talk from Dr. Kosaki, who is, I guess, in charge of Papahanaumokuakea.
Okay.
And yeah, amazing. So these things are unique not only in how specialized and diverse and unique they are, but they're also carnivorous, right?
Yeah. So and they're not only carnivorous, right? So there's various other caterpillars on Earth that eat other insects, and Hawaii has a higher proportion of carnivorous caterpillars than anywhere else in the world. But we also have a very unique life history for this group. There's 2 Hyposmocoma that are actually carnivorous and exclusively eat snails. So this is Hyposmocoma molluscivora, one of the 2 species of Hyposmocoma here in Hawaii that eat snails. No other species of caterpillars on Earth eat snails. And so again, that's kind of a testament to these groups, right? When these groups reach the Hawaiian Islands, super isolated group of islands, right? Volcanic island chain. A couple of different, you notice a couple of different patterns, right? First of all, ecologically speaking, they do weird things like carnivorous caterpillars, like this group that eats snails, likely because these roles, this niche space wasn't being filled by other members of the community when they arrived here, and so they were able to diversify. We have Hyposmocoma that are aquatic. We have Hyposmocoma that behaviorally are very strange. This case here, you can see, is covered in the body parts of other insects. You can even, very clearly see like the head of a spider there. We don't know if this species eats them. We don't know much about this species actually, but it's a very weird behavior. And so those kinds of things were kind of, they've evolved in various different insect groups here in Hawaii, right? This group being one of them. Other interesting things, not necessarily about.
This is the tree for Hyposmocoma?
This is not the tree for Hyposmocoma. I don't know who put this here.
It's okay. It's just
this
saw
is just
some trees, and
a
we've been
general
kind of talking about trees just a little
moth
bit.
tree, I believe.
That's cool.
Yeah, so that'd be the second kind of best represented group here in the collection. I would say is the Lepidopterans. More than 350 species of Hyposmocoma alone have been described, and probably hundreds more than that exist. So again, another hyper-diverse group, and you'll notice this poster's kind of blown things up, but if you look in the drawer over here, most of the things that we have here in Hawaii are small. We don't have a lot of big insects. I'll point out the biggest insect that would have been here before we started introducing other things. But again, we're super isolated, so big things just tend not to get here. These groups are probably, their small size is an advantage when it comes to actually reaching these this middle region of the Pacific, where things like the wind currents can blow them for hundreds of miles. Right, these probably weren't intentional migratory behaviors or dispersal behaviors. These are things that were just fortunate enough to reach the Hawaiian Islands, and they were rewarded in the sense that they were able to diversify extremely.
And guys, that's a great example of founder effect, that just a couple individuals in a more larger and likely more diverse population on the mainland, wherever that might be, get blown off course, like Brad's just saying, and because of their small size are able to be dispersed like that, and for such a far away to be able to reach somewhere as remote as this, and then subsequently diversify.
Yeah, I mean, in most groups we see things kind of staying small. Believe it or not, when it comes to these Hawaiian Drosophila, these are actually giants, relatively speaking. So compared to your common, Drosophila melanogaster that you might see in a genetics lab or something like that, you can see this picture illustrates it very clearly that the melanogaster is many times smaller than maybe the average Drosophila species here. So this would be kind of, believe it or not, our example of maybe island gigantism, right? Being freed from those predator pressures, those resource restrictions, and being able to kind of grow in size.
Great.
I think we used to have the Hawaiian goose, right? That would have been another example because I believe they were really, really large.
Yeah,
again, didn't have the predator pressure, didn't have maybe the resource restrictions that other relatives had, and were able to increase in size as a result.
So I know you said that this was natives and this was all non-natives,
Yes.
and I know these guys are endemic.
They are one of our only two species of endemic butterfly.
What do we got here in terms of distribution, endemism, where all these taxa that you pulled out are from?
Certain things like the Kamehameha butterfly, I believe, are would have been distributed throughout the Hawaiian Islands. This moth as well. This is Manduka blackburn eye. This would have been the largest insect in Hawaii. A sphinx moth, strong flyers would have allowed them to really kind of homogenize, at least among the islands, genetically speaking. Very interesting conservation case here. Endangered. Was thought to be kind of extinct or very close to it. Was recently rediscovered in some populations on Maui, Kaho'olawe, and Hawaii. And they were found to have shifted hosts, which is kind of interesting. It's from Aiea, which used to be more widespread. That's a heavily threatened plant group here in Hawaii. And they switched to tree tobacco, introduced noxious weed. So that might have been one quick host range expansion that's allowed them to kind of survive. But you really, this is more of the uncommon case, right? That's very
yeah. We've talked a bit about those really complex kind of puzzling what do you do dynamics where a pollinator or a disperser that's native is like, you know, only hanging on or utilizing a non-native symbiont or counterpart, or vice versa, right? So that's really interesting. And so they changed their host to from something that was previously common and a native that's now threatened, and they've come back, and their host now, you're saying, is this non-native tree tobacco. And I wonder if their morphology is subsequently going to shift over time if they stay with that thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how it's kind of changed their physical chemistry or appearance, really. That's not the whole story. Unfortunately, there were some studies. Unfortunately, Christine's no longer here, but she did a project on this moth and found that there's extremely high rates of of mortality in the egg stage due to some sort of predator that attacks the eggs, probably non-native.
Yep.
But it was very hard. We couldn't actually identify what that predator was specifically. So it's not just as simple as maybe restoring Aiea. We probably have to not only improve Aiea populations to really help this moth, but also get rid of some of these non-natives, and it just ends up being this huge project in order to save just this one moth. It really involves saving the Hawaiian Islands themselves, right? And so it's hard just to say what we're going to do. I think right now they do tend to keep certain populations of that noxious weed around, right? They're not just ripping them all up intentionally, right? to save this if you can. So some of the other things I brought out here, I brought out some Hyposmocoma. Again, you see just the diversity in case types. We're actively working on this group. This drawer is actually one that's not even super well organized, but because of that, it has a large range of diversity of case types just in this one drawer. So I like to bring this one out.
So small, yeah.
They are very small. Again, these Microlepidopterans, these little feather wings, easy to get blown off course and out all over the place. You know,
amazing when you see the diversity up close in the pictures like this, and then you see how small they are. It's just incredible.
If you know what you're looking for, these are actually things you can kind of find on your average hike. I don't know about the conservation status of a lot of these. I don't know if many people do.
Short range endemic, and there isn't many, I'm sure. You got some Hylaeus?
Yep, so these are Hylaeus bees. We don't have, again, we kind of cater to what people study. So we have some really nice drawers of flies. We have some very nice drawers of various different types of leps. But this is our only drawer of Hylaeus, and you'll see that some of these other drawers are even more sparsely populated. The collections at Bishop might be a little bit more well put together. They tend to take in a little bit more like general voucher material than we do. But in terms of like research at the university, this would kind of be one of, if not the go-to place. Yeah, the Hylaeus bees, another interesting group. There's about 120 species of Hylaeus in the world. 63 of them are here.
Wow.
So again, you see this scenario where even though the land mass in Hawaii is very small, right? The land area in Hawaii is very small. We have more than half of the species of this group. So
got diverse topography.
Yeah, the groups that get here were able to diversify rather extensively because of this system of volcanic islands where the valleys are now very deep. Things like single valley endemism isn't uncommon, especially for things like the Drosophila, which are so species diverse. A lot of that's because one species might be endemic to a single valley, right?
Oh yeah. Sounds like an incredible radiation. So more than 50% of the world's Hylaeus are from here.
And unfortunately, this is one of the groups that's a little bit more threatened than some. I believe 8 species are now on the endangered species list.
Wow.
The first bees to be listed in the United States. And part of that's because these bees used to do some really interesting things. One of the oviposition substrates for, these are solitary bees, right? So they dig these little channels and they would lay their eggs in these little burrows. Some of them used to use the holes in coral heads that washed up on the beach.
Wow,
right?
Cool.
If you have humans scouring the beaches, developing near the beaches, changing the plants and things like that, and collecting those coral heads, obviously you can imagine those species would struggle. So some of the specimens in here, and we have some of our oldest specimens in here, over 100 years old, some of these species might not be around anymore. And you have to remember, it's a little bit, it depends on when you get to a species and start investigating it. That's what kind of determines how easy it is to kind of list it, right? If you know that its populations used to be really high and then you kind of have watching it over time when those populations decline, you can say, okay, this is becoming threatened, this is now endangered. With groups like this, if you come and start studying them when they're already have really low population density, that makes studying them a lot harder, makes collecting that data a lot harder, and it makes listing them a lot harder. So that could be the case for various Hawaiian insects that aren't listed, but maybe should be, but we don't even know because there's not enough specimens to study them. There's a moth on Kauai called the Kauai green sphinx. It's pretty much this ghost in the forest that no one knows about. They're rarely ever seen. I think a couple were seen in like 2010. It was a big deal because they're still around, but we don't know what they eat. We don't know where they live.
Wow.
And so that kind of situation is probably not uncommon, especially given how many species are threatened here in Hawaii, right?
Yeah.
And so when it comes to these Hylaeus, some of them are listed as endangered, but if they went extinct, it'd be really hard for us to even tell.
Yeah, right.
To say something's definitively extinct is a very kind of big deal. And believe it or not, it's really hard to prove if the last of something is gone.
Yeah.
So,
real quick on the Hylaeus, do you have any idea if it was a single colonizing event or if there's multiple?
I don't know that much about the evolutionary history of this group.
That there's 60 of them here plus, and it's half of the world's number. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff, the work on some of these groups, hasn't been done for 60, 70, 80 years. We have another person in my lab who studies bark beetles. And he's just been going out recently and resurveying some of these bark beetles, right? But, and he's finding species that haven't been found for 70 years, And it really depends. If there's no one studying a group and the group's not getting attention, then we really just don't know, right? Modern genetic techniques, well, for starters, Hylaeus genetically tend to be really difficult to work with. They have a single individual tends to have multiple mitochondrial genomes apparently, which can be really tricky when you're trying to sequence things and use mitochondrial DNA to work out phylogenetic relationships.
Yeah, interesting.
So there's a couple of papers that you can find that talk about how kind of difficult they are to work with genetically, and I'm actually working with some for my work, and they are very difficult to work with in terms of just some of those common barcodes especially.
Very cool.
So yeah, I don't know about the introduction there, but I think with things like the hyposmacoma, we do believe it was a single introduction event, right?
Wow.
And again, that kind of thing is even more common when you're more isolated, that it's just a single event kind of leads to this diversification, because it's unlikely that other events are going to occur, you know?
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, and then some other stuff I brought out. These are the only specimens I know of these the Kauai stag beetles that we have. Just these 4. Another interesting group. These are the these stag beetles only occur on Kauai. They never disperse to the other islands. I don't even know if they were on the other islands and went extinct, or if they really were just one introduction event to Kauai and they were never able to kind of jump. But that's some of those beetles.
Interesting that their specific epithet is Honoluluensis and they're not from Oahu.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you'll notice that now that a lot of the names have Oahuensis or Honoluluensis. It is surprising, because to my knowledge, they're only found on Kauai, the Kauai stag beetles.
And look at the size of these guys.
Yeah, this is potentially, I think I heard it was the largest species of dragonfly in the world today. So that's here in Hawaii. This is an endemic species. The label color would normally be purple, but someone used the wrong label. But they've tried to change it. It is endemic.
I see that.
Right? So that's one of our endemic odonates. There's another one here. These are some of the damselflies. Kind of a sad story there, because damselflies and dragonflies mate near and reproduce in small streams, other bodies of water, kind of marshy areas. Their larvae live in the water.
We had
especially
Dr. Butler came and spoke to us about them. Yeah,
specifically about this group.
Yeah.
So yeah,
it's nice to be able to see that.
Normally they'd have a much nicer color here. They're usually bright red, so this is their little wing, the diamonds would typically be bright red. There's a picture outside the museum that kind of shows them alive in all their glory. But another kind of iconic group, conservation kind of challenge.
She showed us some incredible stuff.
Yeah, and then another interesting group here. One of our most iconic hemipterans would be the koa bug. You can see they have really interesting color morphs all the way from green to red, and if you can get close, you can see kind of the very blue sheen. So, again, in terms of conservation status, I'm not sure what this group has, but I know that studies have been done on introduced parasitoids really attacking this group. Yeah. Parasitoid wasps. These are the various things that humans introduce. If I had some other drawers out that didn't necessarily show off these specifically the endemics, there are species here that are the labels say PUR, stands for purposefully introduced, right? So there's a number of very different insects, plants, and animals that have been introduced to Hawaii purposefully to do usually very misinformed things, things like the mongoose trying to control rats, and they don't really have the same kinds of daily routines.
Didn't think that one out.
Make that possible, right? Same thing happens with like insects and controlling plants. People don't always do their research. Things can jump hosts. Things can start attacking other host plants. I mean, sometimes it's fortunate. You get things like the weed that's now saving this Manduka blackburn, this blackburn sphinx moth, but that is definitely the rare exception. And so it's when it comes to plants, insects, obviously super intertwined, and so if the plants are doing poorly, the insects are doing poorly, and a lot of times vice versa. So
it's a wonder it took so long to realize that the whole system needs to be conserved.
Yeah.
Not just one component.
Even the bigger problem is when you try to restore it, there's no easy fix.
Yeah.
Right? Because you have to really work from the ground up. There was a group coming in here recently. They said, we have a plot of land. We want to know what types of insects we can bring in. And it's not really dependent on what type of insects you can bring in. It depends on what type of land you have, what type of plants you can grow, right? Once you get that figured out, then you can start thinking about what types of insects you might even be able to support in that kind of habitat based on the plants that you're able to grow there.
Yeah.
Right. So you have to really start with the ground up and restore that community function. So.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, that was great.
Yeah.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if there's anything else you want to talk about, any questions
just
in particular, I can do my best.
anything you want to say in closing about maybe I guess kind of we've reiterated and spoken at length intermittently throughout the semester about the importance of invertebrates, and I guess you've kind of discussed the importance of a facility like this and what you do here and how it all plays in.
Yeah, I mean, we're a research collection. We help researchers store their materials so that other people can use it, validate it, and that creates a robust scientific community. But collections in general, right, we preserve and maintain biodiversity. We're useful resources for tracking and monitoring the changes in species distributions, in species population densities, right? And so that's what we really try to do here. We have our pet groups, right? Things like the Drosophila have been heavily studied in the past, Hyphosmacoma. But really we're trying to be this broader resource, housing biodiversity, keeping it safe and well maintained.
I guess if and when we go back to normal, and some of the kids want to come and see this stuff up close and personal, should they get in touch with you? How is the hours?
We typically are here from 9 to 5, so people do wander in, and we are usually pretty accommodating. We prefer if people email us ahead of time, and ideally create some sort of group. Right, we prefer not to give full tours to individuals. If we're doing that all day, it'd be impossible to keep up with. But groups of 5 or 10, we're happy to give a short tour or two, and bring out this material and other display material that we have. We keep various types of display material, in part because while the evolutionary stories and history surrounding some of these Hawaiian groups might be really interesting, visually they're not always the most appealing. We have some exceptions, things like the Kamehameha butterfly, which you were actually talking about variation here. There's a sexual dimorphism that the males have an orange cell here, and the females have a white one. So that's interesting. But yeah, it's better to email, and our website has all that kinds of the details for contacting myself. Primarily, I would be the person you contact.
I can give it to them
for scheduling tours. I'll end with one more group that I didn't talk about because it's one that's kind of dear to me right now because it's actually part of the system that I'm studying.
Cool.
That's the vacuum bug here. Another interesting example of highly restrictive endemism. So this is endemic to the summit of Mauna Kea. It has a sister species which may be genetically similar enough to be the same species on Mauna Loa. These are only found on the summits of those volcanoes. They have evolved a completely new life history when compared to other members of their family, the Ligiidae, which are typically plant seed feeders. These are scavengers, and so they live off of the dead and dying insects and debris that falls on top of the mountains.
So it kind of gets blown around in that alpine shrub.
That Aeolian debris. They don't even live where there's any plants or shrubs. They only live at the top where there's absolutely no plants. And they are completely reliant on those things that fall for their moisture and their nutrients and their food. And that's a pretty big evolutionary shift in terms of diets to go from a plant feeder to something that scavenges on the dead and dying of other animals. So.
Wow. Yeah.
Another interesting group, again, you just see those really interesting situations. Yeah, and that is the heteroneura, that wide head. You can really see it in those images there. They use them to fight. The mating behaviors in the Drosophila is another thing. That's sexual selection that really contributes to creating and reinforcing the genetic barriers between the various different Drosophila species. These patterns on their wings are used for dancing. And those heads in that species, that males fight each other. So, kind interesting.
Very.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Brad.
Yeah, thank you for coming and filming, and hopefully things will be back to normal.
Really appreciate it,
Yeah.
and thanks on behalf of all of the students of natural history.
No problem.
Right on, thanks.